Daniel Hayes sat in his Toyota Camry, engine off, watching the house he'd called home for 15 years. The April evening cast long shadows across the suburban street, and somewhere a dog barked at nothing in particular. The vinyl siding needed touch-ups near the gutters. He'd noticed it last weekend, but hadn't mentioned it to Karen. She would have rolled her eyes, made some comment about his obsession with maintenance. The lawn could use edging, too. But these were small imperfections in what had once felt like a perfect life. He remembered when Karen used to wait by the window for him, how her silhouette would appear the moment his car turned the corner, how she'd rush to greet him at the door with questions about his day. Now, the windows were dark, curtains drawn tight against the world, or maybe just against him. The digital clock on his dashboard read 6:47 p.m. He'd been sitting here for 12 minutes, delaying the inevitable walk to his front door. At 45, Daniel had become a creature of habit, a logistics manager at Brennan Shipping who took comfort in predictability. His days were spreadsheets and delivery schedules, optimization problems with clear solutions. Steady income, nothing remarkable, but enough to pay the mortgage and take a vacation every summer. He thought about their early marriage, Karen laughing at his terrible jokes about shipping puns, both of them spending a weekend painting the kitchen bright yellow because she said it would feel like having sunshine for breakfast. They'd driven to every antique shop within 50 miles, Karen finding treasures in what looked like junk to him. A brass lamp she'd rewired herself, a mirror with a crack that she said gave it character. They weren't wealthy, but they had each other, and that had felt like more than enough. The erosion had been gradual, like watching paint fade in the sun. First came Karen's comments about their predictable life, small jabs disguised as observations. Then her eye-rolling when he suggested movie nights at home instead of going out. Her sudden interest in things they couldn't afford. Designer handbags she'd browse online for hours, vacation packages to places he'd never heard of. She started comparing constantly. Her sister's newly renovated kitchen with its granite countertops, her coworker Sandra's photos from Cabo, the neighbor's Tesla that she'd mention every time they passed it in the driveway. The signs of distance had multiplied like cracks in glass. Karen's phone, once casually left anywhere, now lived face down during dinner, password protected when it had never been before. Her book club, that used to meet monthly, now gathered 3 nights a week, always at different locations she could never quite remember. "Oh, you know that coffee place downtown," she'd say vaguely. "The one with the green awning." When he touched her shoulder while she cooked, she'd flinch like his hand was made of ice. She started timing her showers for exactly when he got home. The bathroom door locked, the sound of running water a barrier between them. Then there were the new clothes. A silk blouse that appeared in her closet, tags removed that must have cost more than their weekly grocery budget. Designer jeans she claimed were on sale, but he'd seen the receipt crumpled in her purse. $300 for denim that looked like every other pair of jeans to him. When he complimented her appearance, hoping to bridge the growing gap, she wouldn't beam like she used to. Instead, her face would tighten with annoyance, as if his approval had become not just worthless, but actively irritating. Sunday mornings had been theirs once. Coffee in bed, lazy conversations about nothing important, small projects around the house that gave them shared purpose. Now, Karen slept until noon, claiming exhaustion from her busy week, then disappeared for hours with explanations that grew vaguer each time. "Errands," she'd say, or "meeting a friend." When Daniel suggested they work in the garden together like they used to, she snapped with sharp contempt. "God, Daniel, don't you want more from life than playing in the dirt?" He finally opened the car door, grabbed his laptop bag from the passenger seat, and walked up the familiar path to his front door. Inside, he found Karen sitting rigidly in the living room, her posture suggesting she'd been waiting. She wore the silk blouse and her good earrings, dressed for an occasion he didn't understand yet. "We need to talk," she announced, her voice steady and final, like a judge delivering a verdict already decided. Daniel set down his bag slowly, deliberately hanging his coat in the closet, organizing his keys on the hook by the door. He smiled slightly, not from happiness, but from recognition. He'd been expecting this conversation for weeks now, maybe longer. The only surprise was that it had taken her this long to work up the courage. Daniel took his time with his evening routine, Each deliberate movement a small act of control in a situation where he had none. He loosened his tie with methodical precision, folded it neatly on the hallway table. "Traffic was terrible on Route 9, he said conversationally. "They're doing construction near the bridge again." "How was your day?" Karen's frustration built visibly, her fingers drumming against the arm of the couch. "Daniel, sit down." "This is important," she demanded, her voice tight with impatience. But he continued, walking to the kitchen, filling a glass with water from the filter pitcher. "Did you see the Johnsons planted new roses? The red ones you always said you wanted. Maybe we should... Will you just sit down and listen?" She exploded, standing up, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "I'm trying to tell you something!" Daniel finally sat across from her, not on the couch beside her where a husband might sit, but in the recliner that had always been his. He sipped his water and waited, his calm demeanor clearly unnerving her. She'd expected tears or panic, not this quiet attention. Karen launched into her prepared monologue with the confidence of someone who'd practiced in front of a mirror. "Daniel, we've been growing apart for years now. You must feel it too. This isn't working anymore. This life, this routine, this... mediocrity." She paused, clearly expecting him to interrupt, to defend their life together. When he didn't, she continued, gaining momentum. "You're content with so little," she continued, her voice taking on a pitying tone. "Your job, this house, the same restaurants, the same vacations to the same cabin by the lake. You have no ambition, no drive to be more than what you are, and that's fine for you. But I'm suffocating here, Daniel. I'm 42 years old and I feel like I'm already dead, just going through the motions of a life that was never meant for me." She stood and began pacing, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor they'd refinished together 3 summers ago. "I need more. I need excitement, culture, someone who appreciates the finer things in life, someone who sees me as more than just a suburban housewife marking time until retirement." Daniel listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if taking mental notes on her performance. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected, no begging for another chance, no promises to change, no desperate attempts to save their marriage. His silence seemed to both embolden and disturb her. "There's someone else," she finally declared. Dropping the words like a bomb, she expected to devastate the landscape of his composure. "I see," he responded simply, setting down his water glass carefully on the coaster. Karen hated water rings on the furniture. The lack of visible impact frustrated her, and she began to elaborate, unable to resist bragging about her conquest. "His name is Gavin Brooks. He's a real estate developer, very successful. We met at that coffee shop downtown Brewster's, completely by chance. He accidentally knocked over my latte and insisted on buying me another one. We got to talking and..." She trailed off, a smile playing at her lips at the memory. "He's everything you're not, Daniel," she continued, her words sharp and deliberate. "And I don't mean that cruelly, just honestly. Gavin has a penthouse apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the entire city. He collects vintage wines, actually knows about them, not just drinks them. He has Italian leather furniture that costs more than your car. He wears custom suits, travels to Europe for business. He's cultured, sophisticated, ambitious." Karen's eyes lit up as she painted the picture of her future life. "He's already talking about the trips we'll take. Paris, Rome, Barcelona. Real trips, not camping by some muddy lake. He knows people, important people. There are charity galas, gallery openings, a whole world I've been locked out of because you're satisfied with mediocrity." She pulled a business card from her pocket, holding it like a winning lottery ticket. "I've already spoken to a lawyer, Samantha Reed. She says the divorce can be simple. I don't want anything from you. No alimony, no long, drawn-out property division. I just want a clean break. You can keep the house, your retirement, everything. I'm not trying to hurt you, Daniel. I just need to be free to live the life I deserve." "If that's what you want, Karen, then I won't fight it," Daniel said, his voice even and controlled. "You're right, you deserve the life you want." His agreement caught her off guard. You're not going to try to change my mind? Fight for us? For our marriage?" she asked, confusion evident in her voice. "Would it matter if I did?" he responded calmly. "You've already decided. You've already seen a lawyer. You're already planning your new life with Gavin. What would be the point of fighting for something you clearly don't want?" Within 2 weeks, the papers were signed. Karen packed her belongings with the excited energy of someone preparing for a long-awaited vacation. She hummed while she folded clothes, smiled while she boxed up her jewelry. She left their wedding photos on the mantel, but took the expensive frame they'd come in. She packed the silk scarves, the designer jeans, the shoes she'd bought but rarely worn because they were too nice for their regular life. On her last morning in the house, she stood in the doorway with a suitcase in each hand. "I hope someday you understand this is what's best for both of us," she said, not unkindly. "Maybe you'll find someone who's happy with the life you can provide." Daniel watched from the window as she loaded her car. Each trip to the trunk executed with the efficiency of someone who'd mentally rehearsed this escape 100 times. As her car disappeared around the corner, he stood at the window and spoke to the empty room. She had no idea whose arms she was running into, or that I'd been waiting for this moment for months. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Daniel met Jason Martinez at Murphy's Tavern, a dimly lit bar near the industrial district where they'd been regulars since their college days. The place hadn't changed in 20 years. Same cracked leather booths, same jukebox that skipped on B7, same bartender who knew their orders by heart. Jason slid a beer across the scarred wooden table with a knowing grin. "So how does it feel to be a free man?" "Like I've been holding my breath for months and can finally exhale," Daniel replied, raising his glass. They clinked glasses, but there was something conspiratorial in their laughter, a shared secret that went deeper than simple celebration of a friend's divorce. "She really had no clue, did she?" Jason asked, leaning back with his smile widening. "None," Daniel confirmed. "Completely bought the whole thing." The conversation drifted back to 3 months earlier, before Karen had asked for the divorce, when everything had changed. Daniel had come home early from work, stomach churning from what he'd thought was food poisoning from the sketchy lunch truck near the office. He'd found Karen's laptop open on the kitchen table, her email visible on the screen. His first instinct was to close it, to respect her privacy even though she'd been growing more distant by the day. But a name caught his eye in the preview pane. "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful, Rick." Curiosity overrode courtesy. Daniel sat down and scrolled through the message thread. 4 months of romantic exchanges, increasingly explicit with someone named Rick Patterson. Meeting arrangements, hotel confirmations, photos that made Daniel's stomach turn for entirely different reasons than the food poisoning. But Rick wasn't alone in Karen's inbox. There was also David from 6 months ago, complete with credit card receipts for dinners Daniel had thought were with her sister. Before David, there'd been Anthony, who'd apparently been the reason for all those late nights at the gym Karen had suddenly developed an interest in. The pattern was crystal clear. Karen was a serial cheater, constantly seeking validation from new men, each one supposedly an upgrade from the last. She'd been living a double life for at least a year, possibly longer. Daniel realized their marriage hadn't died a natural death. It had been murdered slowly, deliberately, one affair at a time. That night, instead of confronting Karen when she came home late from book club, she'd claimed, Daniel had called Jason. "I need your help with something, and it's going to sound crazy," he'd said over the phone. Over beers at this same booth in Murphy's, Daniel had laid out the situation and his emerging plan. Jason, recently divorced himself after catching his ex-wife with his former business partner, was immediately intrigued. "You want me to what?" Jason had laughed, incredulous. "Pose as some rich developer?" "Her next mark," Daniel had corrected. "Look, she's going to leave me anyway. These emails make that clear. But she's waiting for the right opportunity, the right guy with the right bank account. So let's give her exactly what she thinks she wants." They'd spent hours that night working out details. Jason would become Gavin Brooks. The name had taken 15 minutes of brainstorming to perfect, something that sounded wealthy but not so unusual it would trigger suspicion. They researched real estate development firms, studied luxury apartment listings, learned the vocabulary of wealth. Jason borrowed his brother's BMW for 3 weeks, bought an expensive suit from a consignment shop that looked new enough to pass. He studied wine terminology online, memorized the names of European cities he'd never visited. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They identified Karen's gym schedule, noting she always stopped at Brewster's Coffee afterward. Jason would engineer a chance encounter, play the part of the wealthy, sophisticated man she was hunting for. He'd string her along just long enough for her to take the bait and leave Daniel for greener pastures that didn't actually exist. "This isn't about destroying her," Daniel had explained that night, nursing his third beer. "It's about revealing who she really is. She's going to leave me no matter what. The emails prove that. But this way, she leaves on her own terms, thinking she's won. And when it all falls apart, she'll have no one to blame but herself." "What happens when she finds out I'm not rich?" Jason had asked. "When she realizes Gavin Brooks doesn't exist?" "You disappear," Daniel had replied with a grim but satisfied smile. Phone disconnected, no forwarding address. Gavin Brooks vanishes like smoke, and Karen gets to figure out that she bet everything on a mirage. The execution had been flawless. Jason accidentally bumped into Karen at Brewster's, sending her $4 latte across the floor. He'd insisted on buying her another, then another, when she'd agreed to sit and chat while she dried off. Within a week, they were texting constantly, Karen hiding her phone but smiling at it like a teenager. Within a month, she was telling Daniel she had to work late, meeting Jason for dinners where he'd pay cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. Jason had played his part perfectly. He was mysterious about his business dealings, dropping hints about international investments and development projects without providing concrete details. Always busy with important calls, he'd taken another room. Always apologizing for having to cut dates short for urgent meetings that didn't exist. "The hardest part," Jason said now, signaling for another round, "was not laughing when she'd complain about you. How boring you were, how you had no ambition. Meanwhile, she's telling this to a guy who works at a copy shop and lives in a studio apartment." "To the perfect con," Daniel said, raising his fresh glass. "To patience over revenge," Jason replied, clinking it. They both understood the magnitude of what they'd done, not just tricking Karen, but exposing her true nature. She hadn't been pushed or manipulated into leaving. She'd chosen to abandon her marriage for what she thought was a better opportunity, proving that her vows, her commitment, her love, none of it had ever been real. As they left the bar, Jason asked, "Think you'll ever see her again?" "Probably," Daniel replied with a shrug, pulling on his coat. "This town isn't that big. When I do, it'll be interesting to see how she explains her new life with Gavin Brooks, the mysterious real estate developer who doesn't exist." 3 months later, 6 months after the divorce, Daniel pushed his cart through the familiar aisles of Save Mart, the fluorescent lights humming their usual tune. He'd always done the grocery shopping. Karen had found it beneath her, one of those mundane tasks that reminded her too much of the ordinary life she was desperate to escape. His list was simple: milk, bread, cereal, the basics of a bachelor's pantry. He'd turned into the cereal aisle comparing prices on cornflakes. When he saw her, Karen stood 20 feet away, wearing the faded blue vest with Save Mart's cheerful logo, mechanically placing boxes of granola bars on the shelf. Her hair, once professionally styled every 2 weeks at the expensive salon downtown, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. The designer jeans she'd treasured were replaced with standard-issue khakis that bagged at the knees. Her movements were automatic, practiced, the kind that came from doing the same task, hour after hour, day after day. For a moment, Daniel thought his eyes were playing tricks. This tired-looking woman couldn't be the same person who'd walked out of their marriage 6 months ago, declaring she deserved better than their middle-class life. But when she turned slightly to reach for another box, the fluorescent lights caught her profile, and there was no doubt. This was Karen, the woman who'd left him for penthouses and European vacations, now stocking shelves for minimum wage at the same store where they'd shopped together for 15 years. Their eyes met across the aisle. Daniel watched her face cycle through emotions like a slot machine seeking a winning combination: surprise, embarrassment, shame, then something close to desperation. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she was about to speak, to explain, to justify how she'd gone from Gavin Brooks's sophisticated girlfriend to Save Mart Employee of the Month. Daniel felt nothing. Not the satisfaction he might have expected, not pity, not even curiosity about the obvious question of what had happened to Gavin and his penthouse paradise. The woman who'd proclaimed she was trading up to charity galas and wine collections now stocked the same breakfast bars she used to toss carelessly into their cart. The irony wasn't lost on him, but it didn't bring the sweet taste of revenge he might have anticipated. There was just quiet recognition of consequences made visible. Karen had gambled everything on a fantasy, and reality had called her bluff. She stood there in her polyester vest, waiting for him to say something, anything, perhaps hoping for the kind of scene that would let her play victim, or maybe wanting him to gloat so she could be indignant. But Daniel simply turned his cart toward the checkout, leaving her frozen in place, still holding a box of honey oat bars. As he loaded groceries into his Camry, images cascaded through his mind unbidden. Karen signing divorce papers with a triumphant smile, her hand steady and sure. Her excited phone calls to her sister that he'd overheard, finally escaping this suburban prison, she'd said, loud enough that he wondered if she'd wanted him to hear. The way she'd packed her belongings while actually humming, folding each piece of clothing like it was being prepared for a new life that would finally be worthy of her. He remembered her last morning in their house, how she'd stood in the doorway looking back not with sadness but with visible relief, like someone leaving a dentist's office after a long procedure. "I'm finally going to live the life I deserve," she'd said, keys to her future jingling in her hand like victory bells. Now she stocked shelves for $8 an hour and probably lived in a studio apartment, if she was lucky enough to afford even that. Gavin Brooks, the wealthy developer with European connections and vintage wine knowledge, had vanished the moment the divorce was final. His phone disconnected. His apartment, which had only been Jason's brother's place, borrowed for a few carefully staged photos, no longer accessible. Karen had been left with nothing but her own inflated expectations and a reality she was completely unprepared to navigate. Daniel didn't feel victorious. There was no surge of vindication, no sweet taste of revenge served cold. Just a bone-deep weariness, like coming to the end of a long book that had turned out differently than expected. Revenge, he realized, wasn't the triumphant moment movies made it seem. There were no swelling orchestras, no dramatic confrontations where truth was revealed and justice served. Just a woman in a polyester vest learning that actions have consequences. And a man in a parking lot understanding that watching someone's downfall didn't restore what was lost. Driving home through familiar streets, Daniel reflected on the weight of choices. Part of him had expected to feel vindicated seeing Karen brought low, but instead there was only emptiness. She was paying the price for her decisions, but witnessing it firsthand didn't magically heal the betrayal or restore the years of lies. He thought about their early years, when Karen would get excited about finding a perfect tomato at this same Save Mart, when she'd grab his hand and pull him to see some ridiculous product that made her laugh. Somewhere along the way, she'd convinced herself that happiness was always one upgrade away, that contentment was settling for less, that steady love was just another word for boring. That hunger for more had consumed everything good she'd actually had, like a fire that burned through a house while chasing a light in the distance. Daniel pulled into his driveway, looking at his modest home with fresh appreciation. The vinyl siding still needed touch-ups, the lawn still needed edging, but it was real. It was his. Inside, there were no secrets, no lies, no one planning escapes or plotting betrayals. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, home felt like sanctuary instead of just shelter. He stepped out of his car, groceries in hand, thinking, she made her choice. And choices have consequences. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. 1 year after the divorce, Daniel's life had settled into new rhythms that felt like learning to breathe after years of holding his breath. Saturday mornings meant coffee and the newspaper in blessed silence. No undercurrent of tension, no careful navigation around someone else's mounting dissatisfaction. He'd repainted the kitchen, not the sunshine yellow Karen had initially loved, then grown to hate, but a calming sage green that he'd chosen without committee, without compromise, without worrying if it was sophisticated enough. The house felt larger somehow, as if Karen's dissatisfaction had been taking up physical space, pressing against the walls and ceilings. He'd kept some of their photos, the early ones where her smile reached her eyes, where she held his hand without checking to see if anyone was watching. But he'd packed away the rest, not from bitterness, but from a simple desire to move forward rather than sideways or backward. The past was a different country now, and he had no visa to return. Jason stopped by regularly for dinner and football games. They never discussed the plan anymore. It belonged to a chapter that was closed. Gavin Brooks had served his purpose and vanished into the ether, just another cautionary tale about trusting strangers who seemed too good to be true. Daniel had started talking to Sarah from accounting, who found his steady nature attractive rather than boring, who laughed at his shipping puns, who suggested they try the new Thai place but was equally happy with pizza on the couch. Nothing rushed, nothing desperate. Just two adults getting to know each other without pretense or persona. Daniel had learned that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about truth. He hadn't ruined Karen's life. He'd simply stopped participating in her illusions, stopped being the safe harbor she could return to between adventures. She'd ruined her own life by chasing fantasies over reality, by valuing what glittered over what endured. Sometimes, lying awake in the early morning hours, he wondered if she'd learned anything from her fall, if she connected her current struggles to her past choices, or if she'd constructed a new narrative where she was still the victim of circumstances beyond her control. But those questions didn't keep him awake for long anymore. Her lessons were hers to learn or ignore. His peace was his to maintain and protect. The betrayal had left scars. Trust came slower now, skepticism faster. But it had also brought clarity about what mattered. Honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. Contentment, even when it seemed ordinary. The courage to appreciate what was real, rather than chase what was merely shiny. On a quiet Sunday morning, Daniel worked in his garden, hands deep in soil that had been neglected during the final years of his marriage. The tomato plants were coming in strong, the herbs were thriving, and the roses he'd planted where Karen had always said she wanted them were beginning to bloom. As he worked, he thought about the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge required action, energy, ongoing investment in someone else's destruction. It was active, aggressive, demanding. Justice, he'd learned, sometimes required nothing more than stepping aside and letting people face the natural consequences of their choices. The universe had its own accounting system, and sometimes the best thing you could do was stop protecting people from their own decisions. Karen hadn't needed him to destroy her world. She'd burned it down herself with greed and deception. One lie at a time, one choice at a moment. All he'd had to do was stop trying to save her from her own nature. That wasn't cruelty. It was acceptance of who she really was versus who he'd wanted her to be. The morning was peaceful in a way mornings hadn't been for years. No tension about unspoken grievances, no careful monitoring of someone else's mood, no walking on eggshells that were already cracked. The earth was rich under his hands. The sun was warm on his back, and he was finally, completely, and irrevocably free. Standing up to stretch, Daniel looked at his modest kingdom, the small house with its imperfect siding, the garden that would never win any contests, the life that Karen had found so unbearably ordinary. He smiled, not from happiness exactly, but from something deeper and more sustaining, peace maybe. Or perhaps just the simple recognition that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's living well in reality while others chase illusions. In the distance, the roses were blooming red against the fence, exactly where she'd always said she wanted them. But she wasn't here to see them, and somehow that made them even more beautiful. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.